Hello, once again. It is Monday, December 9th, 2024, and this is Alan Zundell with Political Dharma. Those of you who have watched the show in the past will know that there was a different kind of opening tune to go with my title card. So let me know what you think of that, because I wanted to get something a little bit more in keeping with the name Political Dharma and also something for the new year to try out. But today's show is going to be about the usual subjects, which is the problems of alternative candidates for political office, that is, independents and minor party candidates, and trying to break through the two-party system. Now, in the past, I've talked about a different kind of political party, which would be just a party that is allowing all kind of candidates to run for its endorsement or nomination, except for the candidates from the two major parties, which would be a way of challenging them. I'm going to talk about that somewhat today, but more so after I give a little bit of news about the ongoing realignment in the major parties and the problems of the minor parties, particularly the Libertarian Party. I'm going to talk a little bit about my ideas for a different half a party, what I've called it in recent videos. Really, this is my ideological pet project, the kind of party that I would do if minor parties got a fair shot in this system. So this little party with my ideas, which I hope would grow, would work within the larger party, which would not be tied to my ideas. I'm going to sort that out for you in a little bit. But let's start out, first of all, with a question I got from one of my viewers, which had to do with in which states did the alternative presidential candidates do the best. First of all, let's go to Ballot Access News, this article by Richard Winger, in which he reports that all the votes for president, other than the two major party votes, was only 2% of the popular vote, which is a very small percentage, and shows that alternative candidates like independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who wasn't on the ballot in many places and who did drop out of the race and support Donald Trump. So it's hard to evaluate how he would have done if he had stayed in the race. But all these candidates of various parties, other than the two major parties, all added up to just 2%. And to answer the question of my viewer about in which states they did best, well, they really didn't do well in any of them. Here I have a comparison between 2024, this last presidential election, and 2016, two election cycles ago, in which minor party and independent candidates did particularly well. But even there, you can see they didn't really break the threshold of about 3% or so. Let's start off with the right side there, 2024. The Libertarian candidate in 2024 for the presidential race got the highest percentage of voters in North Dakota, and that was only 1.7% of the votes there, so less than 2%. And the second highest was Wyoming at 1.6% of the vote. Total wide, nationally, the Libertarian candidate got only 0.4%, that is 0.4% of the vote nationally, and the Libertarian Party was on the ballot in almost all the states. So this is not an artifact of not being on the ballot. It's an artifact of the fact that a lot of people didn't vote for Libertarian Party candidates. And I'll go into some of the problems of the Libertarian Party in a minute. Then the Green Party candidate, who happened to be Jill Stein, both in 2016 and in 2024. In 2024, she did her best in California, Maryland, and Maine, all of which she got 1.1% of the vote, not very high, but she did well across the country. That is, she did consistently across the country, more so than the Libertarian candidate, but got 0.5% of the vote. That is, across the nation, she did a little bit better than the Libertarian candidate, even though the Green Party was not on quite as many votes as the Libertarian Party. But she did, where she was on the ballot, she did around 1% or a little less. So that gave her about 0.5% in the final count across the nation, whereas the Libertarian Party candidate was about 0.1% less nationally. So neither of them did particularly well in any of these states. And then finally, the independent candidate in this case was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In these states where he was on the ballot, the state where he got the highest percentage vote was Montana, which was only 2%, not any higher than that. And the second highest, there was a tie between Alaska and South Dakota, where he got 1.7% of the vote, for a total of roughly a 0.5% nationally. So you can see that just getting to the threshold of 2% was difficult for any of these candidates. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Was the most successful, but even there, the Libertarian and Green Party were not far behind, even though 2% is a very small percentage of the votes in any contest. So minor parties do not do well. Independent candidates generally do a little better, but in this case, kind of anomalous because Kennedy removed himself from the competition. But let's look back at 2016 now for comparison. And 2016 was a good year, comparatively speaking, for independent and minor party candidates. You see at the top, the Libertarian Party candidate, who was Gary Johnson, he got 9.34% in New Mexico. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but getting close to 10%, that is 9 and about 1/3% of the vote, is really high for any minor party candidate, any alternative party candidate. And the reason for that was that Gary Johnson was formerly the governor of New Mexico, that state in which he got that 9 1/3% of the vote. So there's something to be learned there. And then in North Dakota, the other state where he did the best, he got 6.22% of the vote, which is pretty respectable for an alternative party candidate. Nationally, just 3.3%. So even though he did very well in a couple of states, still nationally, he barely got over 3% of the vote, which again is high for any of the alternative party or independent candidates, but low in comparison to the major parties. They're really not making much of a dent in the election there. The Green Party candidate, as I said, was Jill Stein in 2016 as well. She did better in that year. The Green Party, as well as the Libertarian Party, both did better. In Hawaii, she got 2.97% of the vote. That is almost 3%. And in Oregon, she got 2.5% of the vote. But still, overall, nationally, that just added up to about 1.1% of the vote. So she got close to 3% in one state, but her performance was not as good as those in the other states. So nationally, barely over 1%. And the independent candidate was Evan McMullen, who was a House of Representatives member from the state of Utah before he ran for president. He wasn't on very many ballots either, but in Utah, he got 21.54% of the vote, which is really high. And that is because he was from the state of Utah, which generally votes Republican. They did not want to vote for Donald Trump because Utah is full of Mormons who take their moral principles seriously compared apparently to some of the evangelical Christians. In Idaho, he also did well, 6.73% of the vote, but still, he didn't do well in a lot of other states, and he wasn't on the ballot in many states. So nationally, just 0.5% of the vote. So what you can see there is even in a good year, which 2016 was, they can barely break. Most of the candidates barely break 1% of the vote nationally. Even in an unusual case, it's just over 3% for Gary Johnson, who was a candidate that did well in just a couple of states and well enough in a couple of states to pull up his average overall. So what we can judge by that, we would say that when a candidate has name recognition within a particular state and has government experience, has held office, they are likely to do much better. Even there, though, they cannot seem to break out of this ghetto that independent and minor party candidates seem consigned to. And I would say there's a lot of reasons for that ghetto, primarily having to do with our voting system, that we only elect one candidate per office, which means most people want to line up between one of the front runners because if they don't, their vote might be so-called wasted. And because, I've talked about this for a long time, the problems of the electoral system, how we vote, how things are set up in general, tends toward a major party system. But why can't, in a time when people are expressing a lot of dissatisfaction with the major parties, either becoming unaffiliated with any party or looking around for some kind of new party, saying they would vote for a third party, they'd like to see a third party, they don't vote for the actual third parties that are in existence. So part of it is our electoral system. Part of it is somehow these parties and candidates are just not attracting support. All right, so where am I at here? Let's talk about one of those, Libertarian Party. They did the best in 2016 of all these parties. And in fact, that was the best performance of a minor party in a long time in several presidential cycles. Now, let me say that other than the presidential race, the minor party candidates do better when they're in nonpartisan races, like at the local and state level for county, city seats, stuff like that. But there, they don't even have to have a party for that because they don't use the party label on the ballot, and it doesn't help them get on the ballot. And probably people are more likely to vote for you if they don't know that you are from a minor party as opposed to knowing that you are. So it's not the minor party label that's attracting people. They don't do very well in partisan office in general. They may elect a few more people than they would at the presidential level, which is 0, but not very many, maybe a few in the state legislature. So the Libertarian Party has been the one that performed best in the presidential race and occasionally in other races as well. But that party is falling apart this year because some of the folks in the party decided, apparently, that it's not enough to run your own candidates. You somehow got to make an alliance with the major party that you are the closest to. So they gave support to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., hoping he would somehow crack the two-party system. But then even more so, they were working with the Donald Trump people to support his candidacy in order to try to get a libertarian within a cabinet position in the Trump administration, and also to get him to take a few of their platform items, like releasing some political prisoners like Edward Snowden and a couple of others. So they were making that trade-off, hoping that Trump would give them some concessions if they supported him. That is a caucus within the larger Libertarian Party. And there was a big fight over this. And the fight spilled over into a fight between the chair of the party, who is part of that Mises caucus, and the secretary, who objected to their playing footsie with RFK and with Trump. Let me show you this particular article. This is from the Independent Political Report. Libertarian Party Judicial Committee overturns suspension of National Secretary. Now, what that's about is that the Mises Caucus dominates the National Committee of the Libertarian Party, and the National Committee voted to throw this National Secretary out of office because she was not cooperating with their plan, and she was objecting to what they were doing with Trump and RFK. And in fact, she made sure that in Colorado, their actual nominee, Chase Oliver, got on the ballot instead of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So the majority of the National Party threw her out of office, but then the Judiciary Committee of that party put her back in office. So you can see the infighting ongoing in that. There was also an article here in the Third Party Watch by George Felix, and he got this information from a libertarian activist, Jake Porter. If you see it on your screen there, it is about the Rescue the West Incorporated nonprofit group. They're looking at where this organization, who's behind it, and where does it get its money lately. And it turns out that it looks like the contact for this nonprofit is none other than Angela McArdle, the chair of the Libertarian National Committee. Now, what is she up to with this nonprofit? It looks like, this is the text from this article in Third Party Watch, there were donations from various Robert F. Kennedy Jr. affiliated PACs and interest groups to this nonprofit. We see American Values 2024, which was that independent PAC that was supporting Kennedy's presidential run. They gave $20,000 to this Rescue the West nonprofit in September, and then another $130,000 later in September. The Kennedy Victory Fund sent $25,000. The MAHA Alliance, that is the Make America Healthy Again Alliance, affiliated with Kennedy, gave $200,000 and another $300,000. That's $500,000, folks. And then the Make America Healthy Again PAC sent another $1,000, and then a final donation of $100,000 was made in November. So that's about $750,000 from these Robert F. Kennedy Jr. affiliated PACs and interest groups going to this nonprofit that seems to be run by the chair of the Libertarian Party. Now that looks like somewhat of a quid pro quo for their support in the presidential campaign. And it is stuff like that that is making libertarians either engage in this infighting, drop out altogether, or leave to create yet another new minor party, which is the Liberal Party. Over this last weekend just passed, the Liberal Party had their inaugural convention, and they are now at 12 states as affiliates of this national committee, and they intend to run a presidential candidate, or at least that's what they're aiming at in the next presidential cycle. And you can see here a map of the states in which they have affiliates of this national committee, and they intend to run a presidential candidate in the next presidential election cycle. So this includes the states of Oregon, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. So that's 12 states I think I named. And they've broken away from the Libertarian Party. They're now calling themselves the Liberal Party. And the point of that is to promote libertarian candidates for office. They call it liberal because they're going back to the philosophy of classical liberalism, which libertarianism derives from. And so we have yet another new party, which is not going to be on the ballot in very many states, or they're going to have to fight to get on the ballot in a bunch of states over the next 4 years to get their whatever presidential candidate they come up with. So they're not likely to perform very well the next presidential cycle. Neither is the Libertarian Party if this split takes hold, leaving the Green Party as the probably going to be the most successful of these minor parties. The Green Party, which rarely gets above about 1-2% of the vote in the presidential election. Now, these problems of the alternative candidates and parties are why I came up with this idea for a different kind of political party. One of my viewers suggested I call this a meta party, and then my own little more ideological party that I want to start, like a I forget the name for it, but an ideological party. But I thought the Meta idea was good, but Meta is associated with the Facebook company, so not so good. I thought of a few others like Maxi, which also has connotations which I did not want to invoke, and I don't know what, but I don't have a name for it. I think the name should be something that should be discussed among whoever gets involved with me in this project. If nobody else gets involved, well, then it doesn't need a name because it's not going to go anywhere. But today I'm calling it the mothership. And the reason for that is that I was listening to some UFO hearings in Congress recently and reading up on some of the history of UFO reports. I find this, like, if there's anything at all to these stories about unidentified, not so much the unidentified flying objects, but the flying objects that maybe got close to Earth and even had inhabitants interacting with people, that stuff is pretty mind-blowing. If there's any truth at all to some of that, it could be the biggest earth-shaking news in the history of mankind. So I'm curious about that, and I can't seem to dismiss it very easily as I look into it. Anyway, so I've been thinking about that, and we do have this mothership here with the flying saucers come out. And the reason I'm calling the party a mothership party, this is a temporary name that I'm giving it, because the mothership is where the little flying saucers, they're not so little. The mothership is huge. The flying saucers are like, I don't know, 8-10 feet in diameter or something, or somewhat bigger, but they're smaller than the mothership, and they sometimes seem to come out of it. So the mothership would be this big party that includes whoever wants to belong to it, no matter what your ideological perspective or party affiliation is. And you can vote among the candidates for an office, except for the Democrat and Republicans. So the flying saucers would represent all the various caucuses supporting various candidates, various independent candidates, or a caucus for the Green Party, a caucus for the Liberal Party, et cetera, et cetera. And they can all enter into this mothership to vote among their candidates for the one they would like to promote as the candidate of this big party. And then they could run their candidate along with them as well, assuming that they want to do that and they want to maintain an independent existence. But before I get into that too deeply, let me talk about what's going on with the major party realignments that I've been talking about. Now, part of that realignment was when Kennedy was picked to head the Department of Health and Human Services by Donald Trump. And there was an article a little over a week ago about how Kennedy had been vetting a lot of people to be the head of the Department of Agriculture, and he was lobbying Trump extensively over the last few weeks for a pick that would cooperate with him, that is Kennedy, with Kennedy on his plans to change the way we produce food in this company, to reduce the use of pesticides, to use regenerative agricultural methods to capture carbon, and so on. And so he wanted someone he could work with that shared his values. But as it turns out, that Trump did not choose anyone that Kennedy proposed to him. He chose instead someone who had been in his previous administration, a woman named Brooke Rollins, who is also co-founder of the America First Policy Institute that's been affiliated with Trump, and wanted to propose an agenda for them, similar to Project 2025, which you probably heard about. America First Policy Institute is a think tank that tried to propose an agenda. But the point of this story is that Kennedy's trying to get a place within this realigned Republican Party under Donald Trump, and he's having to jockey to get some allies within the administration. And if this pick for the Department of Agriculture is not someone that's going to work closely with him, it looks like his attempts have failed, and that he's not going to have as much influence as he would like. Now, it may turn out that she is actually an ally to him, or it may turn out that he's able to dominate the policy decisions through his position as the chair of the Health and Human Services. So we don't know how this is going to play out, but it is an indication that perhaps this alliance is not going to hold together very well, because there's a lot of jockeying for influence, and Trump is notoriously idiosyncratic in the way he makes decisions, and he doesn't necessarily believe in a lot of vetting and policy alignment. He's more like, who's loyal to me, who's shares my priorities, and beyond that, who can I reward that might be doing something for me in return. That's my take on him anyway. So I don't think this alliance has a good chance of holding together over the long term. And this realignment may be temporary. In the meantime, the Democrats are also concerned about trying to shake up their party to meet the challenge of Donald Trump, who led the Republican Party to victories not only in the presidency, but in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. So this story, now both these stories are from Politico, although they've been reported on in other media venues as well. In the Democrats, there has been mutinies against the seniority system in the committee assignments for the Democratic caucus. So the Democrats are a minority in the House of Representatives. They've chosen the leader of their caucus, who is Hakeem Jeffries, and they are now in the process of trying to figure out who they want to make the ranking Democratic members of the various congressional committees, of the various committees of the House of Representatives. And in several of these committees, such as the National Resources Committee, the Judiciary Committee, which is an important one, the Agricultural Committee, once again, and the Oversight Committee, which watches over the executive branch and investigates and demands accountability from the various government bureaucracies. All of those, we have Democrats trying to bring into a ranking position on the committee someone who does not have the highest seniority on that committee, who has not been the longest Democratic member on the committee. Now, typically they do choose people according to seniority, and what this represents is a kind of overthrowing of established rules, because they want to put people who have a different outlook or are more willing to fight against Trump and to take a more aggressive stance. That seems to be what's happening according to these news reports. And in fact, one of the more interesting of these is the Oversight Committee. They are seriously considering making Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is far from the most senior member on that committee, the ranking member in it. So like a vice chair of the Oversight Committee, handling when they hold hearings or are trying to investigate how the bureaucracy, the national executive bureaucracy, is doing. And you would expect her to be very much aggressive in her youthful energy to try to defend the positions of the Democratic Party, especially the more progressive wing. So interesting developments there as well. Having talked about the problems of minor parties once again, and further demonstrating how much of a ghetto they're in, and then talking about somewhat of the realignment of the major parties, we see a system in flux. And what I want to do is have a possibility for these alternative candidates to make a bigger mark in the system. I think both the Republicans and Democrats are corrupt. They even Donald Trump, they are so much interested in pleasing big corporations and rich people. They talk a good game about working people, but I don't think working people are going to see a lot of gains from this. This is my unvarnished opinion of both parties, even the Republican Party reconfigured under Donald Trump. So I think we need challenges from the outside to keep those parties on their toes and maybe even replace one if it seems to, if the public thinks that it's far from doing the job and they see a more attractive alternative, maybe we'll have an entirely different party start to take power. So how to do that? Now I thought break out of this minor party ghetto with this idea of a mothership. The idea is that on your ballot, you would have typically your Democratic Party candidate, and then your Republican Party candidate, and then other parties such as Libertarian Party, Green Party, Constitution Party, Party of Socialism and Liberation, or the Liberal Party, all the various parties that there would be. But at the in between these, something bigger than the minor parties, but maybe smaller for a time than the major parties, would be this mothership party, which is what I'm calling it today, not the permanent name that I would give it. The mothership party would allow all these other parties and candidates, the independent candidates as well as the candidates of these minor parties, to compete within their nomination process in order to see which one the voters prefer and to put forward the strongest candidate in terms of popular support as the mothership party candidate and try to break the two-party stranglehold on the system that way. That would not entail the minor parties giving up their role of also putting their own candidates on the ballot if they want to do that, because it's got guaranteed that their candidate is going to be the winner of the mother party nomination process. But I think by getting independents, if I can recruit independents to vote within the mothership primary, that it would be held separate from the public primary and using a voting method like star voting, which is much more fair and allows people to state their preferences between various candidates. I think it could not only pick the candidate who has the best chance of winning support in the general election, but also give these minor parties a chance to grow by showing support growing over time. That is, if they compete within the mothership party for the nomination, each election you could see the level of support they have when they're not confronted with these spoiler issues and wasted vote issues we have in our general election system. Because this would be a more fair process, they could show how much support they're getting and whether they're growing over time, and they'd have a constituency there within that party to try to keep moving forward and recruit new people. So it gives them a competitive field where they can actually show how much they would be able to do if they were not hindered by our electoral system. I've talked about this in previous episodes, so I hope I wasn't boring those of you who have listened to that before. I want to clear up some misconceptions about this idea of this different, bigger party. One is that what I was trying to do is create some kind of centrist party by attracting independents. And I said it was non-ideological, meaning that it was neutral as to which ideology would take hold and which ideological candidates might emerge from the process. I'm not aiming at a centrist. I'm not aiming at anything. I'm just trying to create a field where the other types of candidates other than major parties could have a fair chance of getting the nomination and improving their voter support, their level of voter support, and then challenging the two-party system through that. Now, as for my own views, I would like to have a party that was part of that mothership coalition, trying to gain influence within it. And So it's my vision is not centrist at all. I'm just going to give you a hint of it now and then talk about it probably more in future episodes, especially if people are interested and want to hear more about it. The label I've used for my views is libertarian socialism, which to some of you may sound like an oxymoron because libertarianism is associated with making government smaller, and socialism is associated with giving government more power over the economy in particular. But I think that is not necessarily true. Actually, there are two traditions of socialism, one associated with anarchism and one associated more with Karl Marx, and they've always had their differences. Anarchist socialism has a bad reputation because the word anarchism people associate with chaos and disorder. The thought of these black garbed protesters smashing store windows, or if you look back in the early 20th century, bomb throwing assassins were anarchists. These are people are anarchists, but you can't restrict the label to people you agree with. I don't take a position that supports violence or property damage or anything like that. Really, what anarchism was about is that people trusting people that they can govern themselves. Not if you remove all restraints, they'll be immediately able to do that, but they have the capability of learning to do that, as we can see how people learn to cooperate in their families and their churches and their nonprofit organizations or voluntary organizations, or the way they can form unions, all kinds of ways that people can voluntarily associate and work together. If you rely more on that, then you don't need as much government control. So anarchism is really a way of saying that the state and its repressive, its violence, its threat of violence, of jail, of execution, of fines, all the rest. It's that apparatus is meant to protect a particular class, and if we did away with that, or at least minimized it, that class would not be able to impose its advantages upon the rest of the population. So here, what I mean by libertarianism, I want to show you a little triangle here to try to make this graphic. Government, in my mind, is based on three pillars. That is how people come to cooperate together and what keeps them in that state of cooperation. Number one is the habits that they form. Over time, people learn how to engage with other people and do things in projects that require human cooperation, and they pass these down to other people. Children, as they grow up, are taught this is how to relate to other people. This is how to make your way in the world. This is what you have to do. So you follow some of these practices. So that's the habits and traditions, that make a society. Now, behind that, what establishes a lot of this is two other things. One, which is rewards and punishments, especially the promise of rewards and the threats of punishments. This is what people usually think of as government. Government is that institution that makes people do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. Like you want to avoid crime and disorder by threatening people with fines and jail and other types of punishment to get them to behave well. Now, if you didn't have all these habits of social interaction, no power of threat would be able to keep the society in line. So they have to work together. The power of threat really should be just a backup for that. The reward side of it is that you pay people to do stuff. You pay the police force to go out there and enforce the law. You pay bureaucrats to, whatever it is, distribute subsidies to farmers. And you also, rewards are in the form of subsidies or cash bonuses or tax credits or whatever it is to get people to behave differently. So rewards and punishments. And then finally, ideology and persuasion. By ideology, I don't mean a rigid, fixed idea that people cannot, they cannot hear other people's point of view. I mean a set of ideas that is pretty much taken for granted across the society, or in a large part of the people in the society, the values, the ideas, the things they think are normal, the things they think are important, and persuading people through calling upon those values, or at least trying to change the meaning of those values for people to clarify it or to turn it in different directions. So what I mean by a libertarian government that shrinks the size of the government is not that government would be shrunk, but the rewards and punishments, particularly the punishment side of it, would be what you're trying to shrink. And that is by growing the side that relies on persuasion. So in this triangle, you see rewards and punishment has become a very small component of government. You wouldn't need as much police force or jails or enforcement mechanisms, and you wouldn't need a big military if you relied more and found more success learned how to practice successfully the art of persuading other people to do things. And the only way you can do that is if you find win-win solutions, right? If people feel like it's in all of our advantage, then we can persuade each other to move forward and create new habits of interaction. So I'd like to see a change in the character of the government, less based on coercion, more based on persuasion and the kind of values that we share. Now, the second half of this, that's the libertarian side. The second half is the socialist side, which I don't see as necessitating central planning by the government or the expropriation of private property. I see the core of the socialist vision as this. Capitalism is when businesses, that is, economic institutions, are run by those who provide the material resources. So we have investors who provide money. That money buys the factories, land, vehicles, machinery, all the stuff like that you need to run a business. And those people who provide that, at least nominally, have the ability to elect those who are going to run the business. And so they'll be running it for the interest of the investors, which would be to make as much profit as possible and to increase the value of their shares in that company. That's how capitalism is run. That's why it's called capitalism, because capital, the people who own the capital resources, the material resources, are those who control businesses. Socialism replaces this, turns it on its head. It says that those who run the business would not be those who provide the material resources, but those who provide the human resources, meaning those who work within an organization. The human beings who do the work would be the ones who control the work, who control the business, control the organization. And those who provide the assets would just be given a fair return on their assets, something like a market interest rate on the assets and protecting the giving first claim on any material assets of the organization if it happens to dissolve to those who provided those resources. So you're giving some protection to the people who provide the money to for the business to buy stuff, but then it's run by the people who actually do the work. Now, why is that important? What do I think that would achieve? I think the problem with capitalism, and I've made a whole video of this sometime in the past that you might want to dig up and check. Maybe I'll try to make a short video out of it, and so that it's easier to assimilate some of this. The problem with capitalism is when businesses are run just to make a profit for investors, sometimes that can be good, and there's economic justifications for it, but a lot of times it can be bad, especially in times when the people who have money becoming richer and richer and richer at the expense of the people who don't. Think of the environmental problem. You try to maintain profits by offloading your environmental damage to the public at large, which mostly means people who don't have the financial resources to get away from environmental contamination. And we are destroying the habitability of the planet with climate change just in the interest of making profit, because this capitalist machine goes on and just does this as a matter of course. And in a variety of ways, the pursuit of profit means that damage can be done socially. Whereas if the people who actually work in the business run it, they're going to be concerned as members of the community about the effect of that business on their community. As consumers of a service or a resource or a product, they're going to be concerned about the quality of that and the how safe and reliable it is, how well made it is, all of that. So they'd have a different set of incentives. They'd also want to make money, but they'd have to balance these different concerns, right? And so those who invest the money would be just looking to get a fair market return, interest rate on the money they lend, and their assets would be protected by having a claim on the material resources, but the people actually in the business would be workers. So in a nutshell, that's the central ideas of my libertarian socialist philosophy. What I like to see is government subsidizing the growth of these worker-controlled type of businesses as they subsidize the beginnings of capitalism. Where I think libertarians are wrong are in a couple of ways. Capitalism is not a natural process. The idea that private property gives you the right to run a business is not a natural right. It is simply a social convention that was enforced by the government when they did things like they subsidized the creation of the stock market by giving land to the railroads because railroads required a big investment. They needed a stock market to sell shares, and the railroads couldn't get going unless the government gave them a lot of subsidies. Also building roads and canals, transportation systems, setting up a stable, system of money supply, all that stuff the government does to support capitalism. It could be using its powers to support the growth of a libertarian socialist economy. All right, that's enough for today, and probably you'll have a lot of questions and comments on what I had to say. I appreciate you watching. Like, share, all the rest, and I'll come back again sometime when I get a little time by the end of this week anyway. So bye for now.